in this particular session. Owen Winter is going to go first. Owen, there you are. I'm so sorry because I know people by name, but not by face. So Owen's from Stack Data Strategy.
Yep.
And he poses a question to which he's going to answer is, are MRP models overestimating the Labour vote? So Owen, please give us the answer.
Thank you. Yeah, it feels like a bit of a gear shift to go straight into methodology after really interesting kind of political conversations. So I hope this isn't super boring, and I've tried to kind of link it to some things we've already talked about. John and James actually preempted me slightly talking about the proportional uniform swing thing. So I was like, good, I do have a stepping stone to go into methodology stuff. So yeah, basically all the pollsters agree, and you've heard today over and over, that Labour have a pretty substantial lead over the Conservatives. If there was an election today, we're all fairly agreed that Labour would win. How this converts into seats is a bit more complicated. A couple of the kind of traditional ways you might convert national polling into seat estimates are uniform swing or proportional swing. And I've kind of just tried to look at the comparison between them here. So uniform swing, it essentially just says the swings that are seen nationwide, the change in vote share will be replicated roughly across every constituency. So you just take the change in the Labour vote share nationwide and add it in every constituency and for the other parties. Whereas proportional swing, you use the ratio. So if a party's share of the vote has increased nationwide by 20%, you'd expect that to happen in every constituency. So they're very similar in their kind of theory, but in practice, it makes for quite different predictions. So here it's worth about 30 seats for the Conservatives. They do much better on uniform swing than proportional. And I've left them out because it messed the whole thing up. But if you include Reform and Green, whose vote share is whatever quadrupled, then they'll get like a bunch of seats, which I didn't think was realistic. But it's a good illustration of the fact that neither of these are perfect representations of what happens in constituencies. So uniform swing is a funny one because it's kind of unintuitive. You might expect that if a party is gaining votes or losing votes, they would do so roughly in the same proportion across the country. So if Labour's losing 5% of its vote, you think it's almost a certainty that they're going to lose more votes in Liverpool, where they've got 80% of the vote to start with, versus North Cornwall, where they've got 5%. But it actually works surprisingly well in past elections. And a lot of this is probably because discussion about politics and the formation of political opinions is conditioned by the people who are around you, people who are speaking about politics. So parties proportionally tend to do much better in their best seats than their worst seats, election to election. So this is just an example of the 2019 election. If you were using a proportional swing where Labour loses, at the 2019 election, I can't remember the numbers, but where Labour loses a certain percentage of its vote in every seat, you would underestimate Labour in its best seats and overestimate them in their worst seats. Whereas uniform swing, on average, gets the relationship slightly better. So as John was talking about, there is a case for proportional swing now, which is maybe stronger than it was before, partly because the Conservative drop is so large that if you use a uniform swing in like 100 constituencies, their estimated negative vote share, which is impossible. There's also some kind of real world election evidence that there's some sort of proportional swing. So the Conservatives are doing really bad in their heartland areas, both in local elections and in by-elections, thinking about places like North Shropshire, Cheshire and Amersham, yeah, a whole load of seats. But if I was to kind of pour cold water on the proportional voting idea now, it would be that we should kind of expect there to be a proportional swing because we're at the midterm of the parliament. So very few voters are actually thinking that much about politics or their voting choice right now. Very few voters are actually speaking about it. And a lot of the kind of neighborhood effect that I was talking about before comes into play in the last few days of election campaigns when leaflets are being delivered, people are talking about who they're going to vote for, there's election debates on TV, etc. So this is using I'm sorry, I realize as I look at it, I've not labeled it very clearly, but this is using British election study data from the last 3 elections. The y-axis is just the coefficient of party support in the constituency on voting intention for that party. And what you can see is that in 8 out of the 9 cases here, that coefficient has increased in the last few days before the election. So all that means is behaviour moves much further towards a uniform swing in the last few days of the campaign, particularly strongly for the Liberal Democrats. So for the Lib Dems, a lot of people forget about them during the Parliament, and then when it comes to voting, they gain a load of votes in their kind of target seats where they're delivering millions of leaflets and they've got, you know, impossible numbers of activists turned out, and they lose a lot of their vote in areas where they're not going to win. So where does MRP come into this? I think a lot of people view MRP as an alternative to uniform swing and proportional swing. What it does is uses large sample surveys to estimate voting intention actually at the constituency level. It's had some big successes, but you know, I don't think it's necessarily a silver bullet. But without going too much into the weeds of MRP methodology, essentially it can make these estimates despite having very small sample sizes in each constituency by pooling information about similar voters in different places. So it takes kind of nationwide assessments of demographic trends and other kind of political trends, and then squeezes towards the average so that in each constituency you get a kind of decent judgment of how things are moving. So the obvious kind of problem with that is that it firmly puts you in the kind of proportional swing camp in terms of the debate before. So this is just an illustration, but using British election study data again, the x-axis here is 2017 vote share in the constituency, and then a very simple model is used to estimate the swing at the 2019 general election. So one model is a multi-level model just using 2017 vote share. And already you can see, that's the red line, already you can see that it's estimating the Conservatives will do much worse. They'll have a negative swing in their best seats and positive in their worst seats. But then if you add in age as a demographic effect, you squeeze it once again towards the kind of national averages. And that's the blue line. So it seems relatively small here, but if you imagine every time you add a new variable in, you're ratcheting the whole thing slightly like this, so that the party you're trying to judge the vote share for is doing worse in its best seats and better in its worst seats. And there's potentially a case for that, but it doesn't necessarily match historic trends. Typically also with MRP, you don't just have demographic variables in, you also have some kind of imputed or estimated past vote variable. Obviously, that's hugely explanatory of voting intention. By far the biggest thing you can put in a model of 2019 vote share is whether someone voted for the Conservatives in 2017. But when you include them together, age and past vote, for example, you're kind of squeezing that huge effect of past vote, because age is predictive both of past vote and of current vote. So for all of these demographic variables, you're pulling away from the effect of past vote towards the average nationwide, and you're pulling all the constituencies towards the national average. So that is really consequential for the same reasons as the difference between uniform swing and proportional swing is. So for Labour, we've already talked about how Labour's struggled in the past with electoral geography that is very unfavourable. That's because they win a big share of the vote in very safe seats and a lot of seats where they are basically nowhere. And then they've got very few seats where they win narrowly, which is just a very inefficient way of having your votes. If you take an MRP, which estimates everywhere shrinking towards the median, all of your votes suddenly are in marginal seats and you're winning way more seats than perhaps you would on election day. And then the kind of opposite end of that is the Liberal Democrats, who usually they're quite good at turning out their vote just in the places that really matter. But if you imagine that you're estimating 10% of Lib Dems to defect everywhere in the country. In 90% of constituencies, that's 1% or 0.5%. And then in their key target seats, it might be 5 or 10%, which is enough for them to lose the seats. And I should have maybe said this at the top, I'm not speaking about any MRPs in particular, because I've had this problem over and over and over with our data, where if you treat the Lib Dems like any other party, or you naively just try and estimate them based on demographics, you just crush them in their target seats. So I'm not sure why I thought I could do the solution to this problem in one slide, but it's because I didn't want to get like too methodological. So one thing is sample size, and probably, yeah, I mean, any MRP would want to have more sample size, but because multi-level models, the amount of shrinkage is partly dependent on sample size, a small sample size MRP will really shrink towards the average nationwide. So this is from British election study data, the exact same model, one with 2,500 random people taken from the sample, one with 10,000. And you can see again, it just shifts the Conservative vote up in their worst seats and down in their best seats. Then another thing you can do, I was talking about the kind of past vote problem. There's pros and cons to this, but you could include demographic variables in the MRP just in interaction with past vote. So because there's this problem that you're underestimating the effect of past vote once you're shrinking everything towards demographics, if you include them only as interactions, you change your model entirely, so it is effectively just modeling the swing, and it deals with some proportion of this problem. And then the final thing is, if it's a kind of Bayesian model, you can give the model a prior to pay much more attention to constituency vote share, and really it's maybe a pushier way to do it, nudge everything in the direction you want it to go, but that might have a knock-on effect. But really the thing I actually want to end on is the chart from before, which is that no matter how much you fiddle with the methodological stuff, the ground truth that you're measuring with MRP during the midterm is almost bound to be a much more proportional swing than you have on election day. So it's kind of an open question, one that I don't have an answer to at all, but I've thought about quite a lot, which is how do you communicate that with MRP? How do we say that the snapshot right now is that the Lib Dems lose all their seats because no one is thinking about voting tactically Lib Dem, given that we know with a fair degree of certainty it's not going to be replicated on election day. So yeah, answers on the back of the postcard. Thank you.
One clarification question as well. What do you think is going on for the Tories in 2017?
Yeah, I wasn't sure. I also saw that and I thought that's a bit odd. My guess is that 2017 was slightly a realignment election post 2016. So they lost a lot of vote share in Remain Conservative seats, gained a lot in Leave Labour seats, and yeah, on average it means that the past vote is much less predictive.
Yeah, but otherwise it's a very uniform, well, maybe not the word uniform, but otherwise it's a very consistent pattern. Thank you so much, Owen. That's really fantastic. Anna Ayers is going to join us now and talk about polling in totalitarian states, understanding Russia. Over to you, Anna. Thank you so much.
Hi everyone, I'm Anna. So